Don't waste your vacation checking in and out of hotels. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and you guys know that I'm a big fan of Space Available because it gives you all sorts of puzzles and nuances to solve while you're traveling, and it gives you an opportunity to have one-of-a-kind experiences with your kids. Today, what I wanted to do was talk strategy for how you plan your travels in a foreign country. Normally, I rent a car and drive myself, so the question is, how best to organize your travel? Basically, there are two strategies that have to do with how and when you plan your lodging. This is the hub and spoke and the lily pad. In a nutshell, for the hub and spoke model, you rent a place for 3 or more nights, and then you take day trips out from that base of operations. For the lily pad, you rent a room for a night, maybe 2. You check in, do some sightseeing, and then check out. See, lily pad, you keep hopping. Both of these models have advantages and weaknesses, and you want to pick the right model for the situation you're in. The main advantage of the hub and spoke is that it lets you settle down for a while. You can unpack, you can maybe get some groceries, you can sleep in a little bit. The challenge with the hub and spoke model is you got to find a place that's centrally located with lots of interesting things to do, and preferably it's an affordable place. Lily pads are great for stops that are kind of in out-of-the-way places, and Pisa comes to mind. Lily pads are also really nice for expensive locations or when you're going to be traveling long distances, and I'll give you an example of that in a second. The drawback of lily pads is that you spend a lot of time checking in, unpacking, packing back up, checking out. If you're staying at some quaint little bed and breakfast, it may be tough to find, you may have to coordinate with the host, and then you gotta lug your luggage around. Here's the other thing to consider. When I'm traveling Space A, I try to avoid having days where I drive for 8 to 12 hours. Technically, you can drive from Ramstein to London in 10 hours, but who wants to wait for a flight and then fly across the Atlantic and then get a car and then drive for another 10 hours? This is all supposed to be fun, not some miserable, godforsaken quest. Typically, I like to aim for no more than 4 hours of driving. That way, if you like where you're at, you can hang around till lunch, maybe even 2 p.m. If you're eager to get someplace, you can wake up early and you can be there by 10 a.m. Or you can just get up early, drive 2 hours, explore someplace, then get in a car, drive another 2 hours, and bang, you're at your next location. Okay, so how do you put all of this together? Recently, my wife and I went to Sicily. We flew into Sigonella Naval Air Station, and then we hopped over to a hotel that was close to the Catania International Airport. There's a couple of reasons why I usually grab this kind of a lily pad when I first arrive. First thing, everybody's tired. They need to rest. So I like to have some place that's close to where we arrive. Second, I like a place that's close to an airport because that makes it easy to rent cars. An international airport lets me check out options in case I run into trouble and I have to buy a ticket back to the States. Fourth, even though I like staying at bed and breakfasts that are interesting and exotic, for that very first one, I usually like something that's more standard, simple, and comfortable. And finally, when my plan is to fly out of the same MAC terminal that I flew into, I usually don't like to spend very much time around it on the beginning of my trip. There's going to be plenty of time for that when we return. Okay, rental car acquired, my wife and I headed off to Naples. Now, that is an 8-hour drive with a ferry in the middle of it. So we lily padded up to Tropea and then Piestrum, spending a day at each location. And finally, we drove into Naples. And like a lot of times when I'm driving into a major city like Paris or Rome or Venice, what I do is I park the car and I don't touch it until I'm done in that city. From our little base in Naples, we went to Pompeii and Scal di Terra, and then the National Archaeological Museum, and we spent a day just wandering around the city. Once we were done in Naples, we hopped back down to a town called Matera. Kind of out of the way, but I just love going to World Heritage sites. Now, Matera is one of those classic places that makes for a difficult lily pad, and that's because I picked a hotel that was really cool, but we had to drag our luggage for about half an hour to get there and drag it back across cobblestones a half hour the next day. And then we made the longest drive of the trip from Matera back to a bed and breakfast in the foothills of Sicily. Now, notice what I did here. I put the long drive about a week and a half into our vacation. By this point, we have been walking some really long distances, and the idea of spending a whole day in the car, that sounds pretty good. Plus, we've had some adventures that we can talk about as we travel back. And we're going back over territory that's familiar. I know what to expect when I get to that ferry. So we get to the bed and breakfast in Sicily that's going to be our new base of operations. We do day trips to Syracuse and Catania. We go horseback riding up on Mount Etna. And then we shifted to a new hub at Sigonella Naval Air Station. From there, we kind of wandered around, did our laundry, got ourselves ready for our trip back home, and then we caught a flight. So you can see how combining these different models can give you a really fantastic trip. Now, you might be wondering why we spent our last days in Italy resting instead of having one big blowout adventure. Well, here's one thing to keep in mind. When you fly home, you're going to have to spend a lot of time in a passenger terminal. And then you're going to have a long flight. And once you get back to the States, you're probably going to have a long drive home. Not to mention the fact that if you have to go to a different passenger terminal than the one you left from, you'll have all sorts of complications. So it pays to be well rested. And now, if you want to see the best way to maintain communications with your unit back home while you're out there traveling, watch this video.